my fundamental moral beliefs led me to Buddhism in the first place.
Mhm.
The idea of nonviolence, the practice of meditation, all these kinds of things were extremely attractive to me. So it was a pretty natural transition to peace studies. I was already an activist, and I said to one of my other prof friends, colleagues, I said, damn it, we got to do something on campus. We can't just be protesting in the streets. We're working here. We got to do something here. He said, well, why don't we start a peace studies program? And I said, what's that? Because I never heard of peace studies before. He said, yeah, no, it's where you systematically study peace and war and conflict. And I said, okay, let's do it. So we did. And we created a Center for Peace Studies and a BA program and all that stuff. It took years, of course, but I was the first director of the Center for Peace Studies, and I did that for about 6 years. And anyway, we could go into details, but I'm, I suppose when it comes right down to it, I'm a peace activist first and last.
Mm.
And when you're working in a university, you have to find ways that that you can manifest your values. And it's not easy. You can't just go telling all the students to be an activist. You can't lay all kinds of trips on them. You can't give them information just that supports your position. You have to find a balance where you are doing, you're teaching with integrity. You're being honest with your students, but at the same time, you're not hiding the fact that you have values. You have taken a position. You're not going to hide that. I would always say to them, I'm going to treat you like adults because that's what you are or should be.
Mm.
So, so I'm going to tell you what my position is, but I'm not going to force you to adopt it. And I'm never, ever going to grade you down for disagreeing with me. Go
Mm.
ahead and disagree. Let's debate. You know. So I did all that for a long time. I guess I taught there altogether 30 years. Part of that was just doing religious studies stuff, Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism. I taught all those things. But part of it was concentrating on peace issues.
Incredible. Where was this that you were teaching?
McMaster University in Hamilton.
Incredible.
Yeah. So it was all in Canada.
Mm-hmm. And that's where the Toronto hearings took place.
Yes.
Of
Well,
note.
why don't you ask me? You've looked at them then, you know about them. So
Yeah, I have a copy of the
okay, so
Toronto report
that's
right
great. I'm
here.
so glad. Yeah.
Yeah. And your chapter, I mean, you were integral in this entire hearing.
Yeah, yeah. It doesn't really say that on the beginning, which is a little unfortunate, but there were 5 of us
Mm-hmm.
who organized it, 3 Canadians and 2 Americans.
Mm-hmm.
Took a lot of work over many months
Mm-hmm.
because the hearings lasted about a week and they were all day long. And we brought what we thought were the best people to speak to these issues that we could find anywhere. And I think it was many of the participants said it was the best event on 9/11 that had happened up to that point. And that was, of course, 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was on the 10th anniversary
Mm-hmm.
of 9/11, and
And it was
so
just
that was
coming.
it was a heck of a lot of work. But I was very happy, very satisfied. The report was put out. There's also a pretty good video because we videotaped the whole thing. And of course, I continued to work on these issues in the 10 years since then.
Mm-hmm.
And now we've just had the 20th anniversary
Mm-hmm.
of 9/11. There were a number of good events, although to be objective here and fair, none of them were as good as ours.
Yeah.
The Toronto hearings still stand out, I think.
Yes. And that's interesting observation, just the receding of time as
Yeah,
the perception ebbs and flows and things are forgotten over time.
yeah,
Eerie is that it, and looking back at this now, looking at this yesterday, reading it, it's so the word that's getting tossed around a lot recently in different contexts, robust. It's like
Mm,
very
mm,
robust.
mm-hmm,
And your chapter in here regarding the eyewitness testimonies
mm-hmm.
is so incredible. And
You froze on me, Nathan.
oh, hello, hello.
There you
Okay.
are. You're okay now.
So
Yeah. You were
your
saying my chapter. Yeah.
your chapter in here on the eyewitness testimonies of the events of 9/11 2001 in New York, on the street, the firefighters, the press, the
Hmm.
people on the ground with the microphones, what
Yeah.
they heard, what they're saying in real time.
Yeah.
And those testimonies, there is a consensus amongst these testimonies that you've compiled for
Hmm.
this
Yeah.
report and for the Toronto hearing. And that is, I mean, do you want to encapsulate?
Sure. I'll be happy to. So we looked at a variety of different things in the week of hearings, but we did pay quite a bit of attention to the destruction of the three buildings,
Mhm.
1, 2, and 7, because in one sense, that's only one issue out of many, but it's an issue where it's more than he said, she said. It's more than opinion. You can measure the way these buildings come down. You can examine the dust from the debris. You can talk to the eyewitnesses or tote up all their different statements. And it becomes overwhelmingly clear that these buildings were blown up. They weren't brought down by airplanes crashing into them. And of course, there is one organization called Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, which started quite a long time ago, somewhere around 2006, still going strong.
Mhm.
And that's their main emphasis. What happened to those buildings? And I think it's appropriate because we're talking about laws of physics and stuff here. You can't fudge this. You can't say it's a matter of opinion. It's an open and shut case as far as I'm concerned. So my part of all that, I'm not an engineer or physicist, but when I discovered that there were, I don't even remember now, 12,000 pages or something of firsthand testimony by New York City firefighters who had been there on the day, as somebody had decided to interview them all, and it was actually a high-ranking member of the fire department of New York, so they didn't have any choice. They came to the office and they said what they saw. And I thought, wow, nobody has read all of these yet. They've just been released because of a court order. This is late 2005. So I'm gonna download the whole 12,000 pages. I'm gonna clear my desk of other things. I'm gonna read it all. I'm gonna count them all and see, for myself. Because at that time I was thinking this was a very fishy event, this 9/11, but I wanted to study it firsthand. So let's just see what these guys were saying. And I found out that something like 90% of the firefighters who were there when the towers came down, and who said anything significant about it, talked about explosions. And there's no room for explosions in the official story of this. Believe me, I've read those reports by the National Institute of Standards and Technology and FEMA and so on. And there's nothing, they don't want to hear about explosions. They want to hear about plane impact, fire damage, structural damage. But actually what people overwhelmingly witnessed was massive explosions preceding the disintegration of the buildings, which took place so thoroughly and rapidly that huge clouds of pulverized debris rushed through the streets so powerfully they lifted people into the air. And this was no gravitational collapse, I can assure you. So I played only a small role in the overall story, but I did talk in that report about what I discovered about eyewitnesses. I later looked into some of the journalists on the scene. About 80% of the TV journalists on the scene also talked about explosions, just like the firefighters. So, in other words, the idea that these buildings blew up was not a kind of after the fact thought by some conspiracy theorists who came dragging their ass along saying, oh, I don't believe the official story. I think it was blown up. No, that was the first hypothesis on the scene. That's what was overwhelmingly the primary hypothesis by people who were right there when those buildings came down. And it's simply corroborated by the other evidence you see there. The discovery of nanothermite in the dust by physicists and engineers and chemists, meaning high explosive and incendiary, which shouldn't have been there. The discovery of evidence of extremely high temperatures in the dust, way higher than, building fires, way higher than jet fuel. Um, all of this stuff, and plus just measuring the descent of the buildings, um, makes it clear that there's no way these were gravitational collapses, and there's no way these were buildings that were knocked down by Islamic fanatics. They weren't knocked down by anybody, they were blown up, and that had to have been done in advance.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'll just read one of the news reports that you quoted, or a couple here that
sure, go ahead.
here from live Fox News alert. Huge explosion that we all heard.
Yeah,
From CNN, and another explosion.
yeah,
From NBC4, Tom Brokaw. We presume because of the initial explosion that there may have been secondary explosions as well that were detonated in the building by these terrorists.
right,
Unquote.
right.
And it goes on. You have hundreds of testimonies.
Well, not hundreds,
36 news.
but the count now is over 160 eyewitnesses, certainly, because I collected 156, and then Ted Walter and I did a recent article adding a whole bunch of more journalists, and they're journalists from all different TV stations. But what's interesting is that the news anchors handle it a bit differently in each case. So the Fox News guys on the scene are saying massive explosion, but their news anchor, what's his name now? John Scott, I think that's it. He's not having any of it. He just says thanks for that report. Obviously, he's knocked down by the terrorists, and he names Osama bin Laden 40 seconds after the second building. Sorry, no, not the second building coming down. 40 seconds after the second building is hit by a plane, he mentions Osama bin Laden. I mean, come on, If you talk about a quick solution of a crime, right? So Fox is actually the worst in terms of not allowing any possibility of an explosion hypothesis. But the other stations all end up in the same place. They're all singing from the same song sheet by the time the day is over.
Mm-hmm.
It's all Osama bin Laden after about noon.
Yeah. And this kind of harkens like with the conversation we were having earlier. I'm an actor and I get into the narrative question and the deus ex machina, the God hand coming down, saving the day, right? And if you have a theater play or whatever, you need to justify the God hand coming down and swooping in to save the day, right?
Well, yeah, go ahead.
And in order to justify that, you need conflict, right?
Yeah.
Simple
absolutely,
as that.
Absolutely. No, it was a very dramatic production, and it was clearly designed and scripted and directed and produced and enacted. I wrote an article about this a few years ago. What's it called? 9/11, the Pentagon's B movie. You can find it on the internet. But the gist is that, like when you and I were talking on the phone a little earlier, you were saying this looked like a kind of a movie that was being produced.
Like Bruce Willis would come
exactly. It's there. Suddenly Bruce Willis shows up. Well, if you and I say that after watching it on the video, it may not mean much. But what I found fascinating was that at least 24 firefighters who were on the scene when they're being interviewed said exactly the same thing. They would say things like, I felt like I was on the set of, a major movie production. And another guy would say, we were running from the dust cloud. I swear it was like a King Kong movie.
Mhm.
And they were going on and on, like one after another. And I think that was perceptive. Other people were just saying, oh, well, it was a big event. It was dramatic. They got traumatized. And initially I bought that. But after I read all their stories, I thought, no, that's quite perceptive. It was directed. It was produced. The
Mhm.
buildings were not knocked down by planes. The planes smashed into the buildings, and that was a hugely dramatic action. And
Mhm.
there were body parts lying all over the ground underneath, which was very traumatizing for people who arrived on the scene. And there were people just screaming, people completely traumatized. This is called trauma-based mind control. You
Mhm.
deliberately traumatize people. But then you want an event that will not only traumatize people at the beginning, but it will conclude dramatically. And you decide, we're going to bring down these buildings. We're not just going to let them stand. We're going to kill a few thousand people. We're going to have the most dramatic event that's ever been on television. And it's going to be televised live. We might not be able to televise the plane crashes live, although in the end they did. But we're definitely going to have all these cameras trained on the buildings when they go down in a huge plume of smoke, and we're going to have people on the ground screaming, oh my God, and crying because they know their own family are in there. That's what we're going to do. And that's what they did, right? That's what they did. And
Yeah.
there's all kinds of signs now that that's what they did. And when people say, oh, well, no, it was these Arab terrorists who knew how to do this. No, they didn't. Are you kidding me? Osama bin Laden couldn't have done that in a million years. The people who had the capacity were states, not non-state actors, and especially the United States. The United States military had been steadily rehearsing actions like that for several years, and we found this out. So, not perfectly what happened, but very close. Terrorist plane crashes into the United Nations, twin towers threatened by terrorists, on and on and on. And they were the ones practicing it, not Osama bin Laden. They're the ones who had the money to finance this. It would have cost a fortune. And to coordinate this and to make sure that none of the fighter planes got scrambled in time to shoot down the airplanes, because they'd had lots of warning. There should have been fighter planes up there intercepting those planes. But no, they were mysteriously absent. And I talked to a guy who he used to be a fighter pilot who scrambled in like that. And he later on went on to command a squadron of planes in the US Air Force. He said he was watching 9/11 unfold. He was sitting there with his wife and he said, something's wrong. Where are the interceptor planes? Where were they? Where were they? There was never any good answer. And so there are just all kinds of signals and signs and evidence, both hard and soft, that this was choreographed and it was planned, but it wasn't by Osama bin Laden, I can tell you.
Yes. And in the last moments of this account here, you talk about three things that stick out. Um, where is it? Yeah, three lines of evidence. The collapse of the three, not two towers, being a red flag. Hey, building 7
Yeah,
wasn't struck by anything, but fell into its own footprint.
right.
Number 2, the molecular evidence, the nanothermites that they discovered in the dust particles. And then number 3, the strange anomalies in lives, identities, and actions of the hijackers, which is, in line
Yeah.
with what you're saying about how did those planes get whipped around the way they did by these
Oh,
people.
it's absurd when you read about these hijackers. Come on.
Yeah.
Like the guy that supposedly piloted the plane into the Pentagon, Hani Hanjour, the guy couldn't even fly. I mean, they tried to, give him some lessons so that it would be a credible story, but it was so pathetic. We got notes. We've got the original notes now, and give me a break saying, who is this guy? He can't fly at all. Even a couple of weeks before the event, he tried to take up a Cessna or something. He wouldn't let him because he was such a bad flyer. He's never flown a jet before of any kind. and he gets in and he does this beautiful spiral down into the Pentagon. Give me a break. This
This
is
is,
too absurd.
to me, this is one of the fascinating parts about it is the absurdity. If you look at the optics of it from a bird's eye view and you look at these little details, it's like, this is absurd. This is
Yeah.
ludicrous.
Yes.
So it's as if these ludicrous details, they certainly
You're
call into
freezing up.
question.
You're freezing up on me.
Check, check, check. Hello, hello. Can you hear me?
A little better now. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
I just am shocked sometimes when I look at these details and it appears so ludicrous, and it's as if they gave us these clues. Like how could
Yeah.
they pretend
Yeah.
that this was what happened, you know?
Yeah. I do understand.
Mm-hmm. And
I have the
yeah.
same. No, go ahead. Do you have a theory about this?
No, I just wanted to also mention to what you were saying earlier, but if you want to complete your thought.
Well, I don't know. I've never figured it out, but it's not only in this case. There are other major deep state events like the assassination of John F. Kennedy,
Mm-hmm.
the assassination of his brother, the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. I've looked
Mm-hmm.
into all of these. You don't have to be a rocket science to figure out
Right.
that the guys they framed for this couldn't possibly have done it. There's
Certainly.
no way. There's no way. It's not that complicated. So this question came up many years ago by people who were researching those events. And they said, well, I mean, there's 40 or 50 perfectly sane people who said the shots came from the grassy knoll right over there. And we've interviewed a lot of them, and we know they're just guys. They're just people like you and me, mostly guys, some women as well. And why do we assume they're all wrong? The
Mm.
assumption normally would be they're not all wrong. That if the 40 people who said the shots came from there, then the shots came from there.
That we're
And that
there on
means
the scene. Yeah.
they were there. Yeah, they were ducking. They were lying in the grass with bullets going over their heads.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing. So researchers had to raise this question many years ago. They said, what's going on? I mean, did these people deliberately choose to slaughter the president of the United States in broad daylight in a way that is this obviously fraudulent? And many of them, the researchers concluded, yes, they wanted to shove our noses in it. They wanted to say, this is who we are, and this is what we can do to you.
Mm.
And many people think the same is true about 9/11.
Mm.
That it's
Right.
so full of holes, so
Right.
absurd.
Right. It's
That
yeah, it's sticking it to the public in a way
yeah,
like this is what we can get away with. Check it out. And
absolutely,
speaking to what you were saying about the firsthand witnesses, their knee-jerk reaction or their authentic first-hand, first
yeah,
principle reaction, we should trust that,
yeah,
first principle aside, but like their first-hand reaction is like genuine, and that should be and is in this text.
yeah,
You
yeah,
compiling the people's firsthand reactions,
yes,
and it, I want to stick to this event,
okay,
but I have to draw myself to the present. I look at what's happening now, and
yeah,
artificial emergencies come in all different shapes and sizes.
yeah,
And I really look at the, contentious. In the beginning, it wasn't content. The lab leak theory around Wuhan
hmm,
was the knee jerk reaction. It was one of the first things that came out, right?
yeah, yeah,
And then it was buried. And just as if we look at these firsthand reports, the CNN, the Fox guy on the ground, explosions, explosions.
yeah,
The first, I feel like humans are smart
yeah,
and it's obvious, but you can get buried. The
yeah,
gray ceiling of controlled narratives
yeah,
descends
absolutely, absolutely.
on the people, and it's
Yeah,
hard to break through.
the Department of Propaganda clicks in, and that includes especially TV.
Yeah.
But now, of course, it's much more sophisticated than back in 9/11. And Ted and I just studied like, I don't know, 70 hours or something of 9/11 same day footage. So we have a pretty good idea of how they buried the story there. But now it's much more sophisticated. You've got Facebook, you've got Twitter, all these things that I personally don't do, but they, people get addicted to them. And then we suddenly realize these are all controlled,
Mhm.
and people are being kicked off
Mhm.
for not accepting the mainline narrative
Mhm.
of COVID-19,
Mhm.
and people are being silenced. And then it gets worse and worse. Doctors get their license pulled. One of my friends who's a doctor got her license pulled the other day. Um, and students at the university here, McMaster, are getting thrown out if they won't get the vaccine. Professors are being fired. This is all over Ontario now. I'm not allowed even to walk onto campus where I taught for 30 years, because I won't get so-called vaccinated. Um, so yeah, we are in the middle of a major, major, highly sophisticated propaganda campaign right now. It's years since 9/11. I mean, 9/11 is crude compared to what's going on now.
Certainly. But the upside of having these, addictive, uh, controlled tools of social media, I
Mm.
mean, I feel that there are a lot of people creating content and sharing information
Yes.
in the form of, minute long or 10-second videos.
Yeah.
um, as our attention spans recede with time, we don't have the 9/11 report now. We have, a,
Twitter.
a leaked documentary, or we have Twitter, we have,
Yeah.
but we're having these things, they're rolling out extremely quickly, and
No,
people
they
are,
are. They
yeah.
are, Nathan. You're right. It's so you can't just condemn all the social media. I realize that. You can't condemn the internet. Where
Mhm.
would we be without them? But at the same time, there's a huge attempt being made now to control those and
Yes.
to censor. And it's a big fight. It's a huge fight going on right now.
Mhm.
I mean, some years ago, the US military made it clear that, I think it was in the year 2000, in the document Rebuilding America's Defenses, that
Mhm.
their aim was to be the dominant power in the world on the land, the air, the sea, space, and cyberspace. Okay,
Right.
this was 22 years ago, and
Whoa.
they've been striving toward that, and they're really trying to do it now. It's really a major battle going on.
Certainly, and there will probably be, in the next, in the future, a cyber 9/11 likely, um,
Yeah, yeah,
um, in order to garner more control over the internet.
I
But
agree. Yeah.
while it's free, we have this window, and I think that's why I'm reaching out to you now. I mean,
Mm, mm,
in part, is like, I've been on this track since, I was saying, I was 13 when
yeah.
I saw it, when they wheeled in the TV when I was
Right.
in elementary school. I even that day looked at it with a quizzical eye.
Yeah.
And yeah, and but today, like, we bring up current events. I feel like this was a catalyst for, of course, so many measures: Patriot Act, Quarantine Act, the Quarantine Act. So it
The destruction of countries in the Middle East, terrible.
and yeah, I mean, yeah, we can't,
Still going on.
yeah, must acknowledge that, and the loss of life, collateral damage.
Millions and millions of people either dead or having their lives ruined
Mhm.
because of this big fraud. So it's still worth studying this big fraud. Every now and then, I think. Sorry, you may have been going in a different direction, so
Not at
I'll
all.
you know I'll do this one quickly. But every now and then, I think, oh, I'm still doing 9/11 stuff, publishing articles, and people kind of yawn and roll their eyes. Oh,
Mhm.
that's so long ago, we don't even remember it. But then I think, that's what they want us to do. Move
Yes.
on to the next crisis. They will always create a new crisis so that the last one will be buried.
Mhm.
And so I don't think we can allow it to be buried. I think some of us need to keep studying this. Others,
Mhm.
of course, need to study all the frauds that have happened since then, including the current one. That's fine. But don't let our attention span be so controlled by the people who are doing this.
Absolutely.
We need to be able to. This is one thing I do regret about Twitter and Facebook and all that, is the fact that some young people now are intimidated by the idea of sitting down and reading a book.
Yes.
You have to, folks, you have to be able to read books. I don't care if they're on your e-reader or if they're physical objects, doesn't matter to me, but you have to be able to read sustained arguments, sustained lists of evidence. It's not just opinion here. And that kind of worries me.
It worries me too. And you know what? It's for me, attention span is
Sorry, I'm missing you.
attention span, reading books, the ability to sustain an argument. Can you hear me now?
Hmm.
The attention
Right.
span issue,
Yes, yes.
I'm totally I'm new to reading myself. I have only really hit the books.
Mm-hmm.
Literally, I'm a theater actor. Like
Mm-hmm.
I read plays, do cold readings and stuff like that. But I was,
Yeah.
I was slow at reading as a child. But then, I'm reading more books today than I ever have, and it's because I'm trying to get caught up, and I got to get deep into these things because the goldfish attention span that
Yeah.
I am totally recovering from. We need to reclaim our ability to have a sustained argument,
Absolutely, absolutely. Well said.
to stay present
Yeah.
because
No, you're dead right. I hope a lot of other young people and anybody who's younger than me is young. Young people in their 50s. No, but seriously, need to do what you're doing and say, you know what, I kind of haven't been really reading anything much lately. And
Mm.
well, you need to, there's history and there's all kinds of stuff. And otherwise we're under their control. We're under their thumb, we don't know what's going on. Like I have so many friends who believe, I hate to say this, it's very sad, but they believe what the mainstream narrative is, whether it's 9/11 or whether it's COVID. And they're very well-read people, but they haven't looked carefully at any of these false flag events. The way, for example, I have. I mean, I spent 15 years studying the 9/11 issue, and I don't expect everyone to do that, but read a couple of books,
Yeah,
and because if you understand what was done there, you will be ready for the next one.
precisely. Yes, and trust. For me, it's like blind trust. Like you were saying, people, even well-read people, are not going down this rabbit hole, and
Right.
that is largely the human instinct to trust. And I think that's so beautiful, but we're being taken advantage of, and
we are.
There's a veil, and you need to see what's behind it.
You're absolutely right. I think that the people who designed 9/11, and they certainly did design it, this was not a spontaneous thing. They knew what they were doing. They were using trauma-based mind control. They were using, basically, you shock the hell out of everyone. You scare them, you make them insecure, they don't know what's going on, and then you come in and you say, here we are. Here we are, we're the government. You love us, we love you, we're going to save you. We're going to get these terrorists, we're going to bomb as many countries as we need to, we're going to wipe them all out, and then you'll be safe. And so they take that trust and they pretend to be the good parent when actually they're the abusive parent, they're the homicidal parent.
Yeah. And they're playing a role. And that's one of the creepiest parts about it. And as a performer and an actor, I'll look at a script, right? I'll read a script. And I remember early in theater school, I was watching some veteran actors, some professional actors who were, more long in the tooth in the craft than me. And they had done a lot of the work, and they were reading a script that they had never seen before. And they were reading it as the role of, some Brecht play, and they're reading their role of like Hansel or whatever. And they're reading it and they're saying the lines, and I'm watching him and I believe him. And he doesn't even know what word is coming next.
Right? Yeah, that's being good at your craft. Eh?
Sure. And then you've got teleprompters, and you've got professional career politicians who are taking notes, and it's like,
and they're all getting their hair done.
They're getting their hair done. You've got, Anchorman. Remember Anchorman? He will read anything that comes on that teleprompter. Go F yourself, San Diego. And it's like that's a real thing. And the people in the other side of the screen, they believe it and they don't break the fourth wall, right? But we,
Yeah.
like I think we need to break the fourth wall of illusion on this one and all of
Yeah.
them.
Yeah. No,
But
no, you're right. You're right.
studying is very important.
Yeah. So this work continues.
Mhm.
Um, I mentioned the organization Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth.
Mhm.
I'm a member at large, but I also have done a lot of work with them. I've also done some work with the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, and what's the other one? 9/11 Consensus Panel. All these groups did fantastic work, and two of those are still doing fantastic work. They're still continuing,
Mhm.
and I always have my eye on what's happening right at this moment. So I'm reading stuff all the time about COVID, but I haven't given up on 9/11 because I think, I put, as I said, 15, I guess it's more like 17 years of my life into that. And I know a lot about it, and there's more work to be done. And maybe that's where my contribution is.
Thank you so much for your contribution. And honestly, knowing where you're coming from as a peace activist, as
Mm,
a even as a Buddhist, and that approach is so needed. And the organizations that you're talking about, A for 9/11 Truth, and these organizations that bring forth knowledge.
yeah.
And in your paper, uh, the use of health initiatives as peace initiatives,
Mm,
it's a little bit different, but it reminds me of it the way you talk about bringing in the communication of the knowledge
mm,
as a principle, bringing forth a health peace initiative
yeah.
to integrate the knowledge and
Yeah.
communicate the knowledge. We need to be able to communicate the knowledge to the people without them glazing over, getting scared, or getting co-opted by the media calling people deniers or calling them truthers or conspiracy
Conspiracy
theories,
theorists.
right?
Yeah.
And I am already getting called these by my friends because of what
Yeah.
I'm getting into.
Yes.
And it's like I expected it because this is the script, right? It's like
This is the
we're
script.
brainwashed into stereotypes. And
Yeah.
even as I go in down this rabbit hole, and I don't even want to call it that,
No, we
but
need a new term for it, but I know what you mean.
yeah,
It
as I
is, we
yeah,
are going, we're going deep, Nathan. We are going underground.
yeah.
That's where the deep state is. That's
Mm,
where the oligarchy is. That's
mm,
where they're lurking. That's where they're hiding with
mm,
all their money and their power.
mm,
And they don't show themselves and they don't display what they're doing on the surface unless you know how to read it.
right.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, so we are going down a hole. I don't know if it's a rabbit hole or some other hole, but
A
but
mole.
we're going under. Yeah, we're going under, folks.
Subterranean, and
Yeah,
it's necessary. And this is an interesting thing I also pulled from your essay. Um, you reference a lot of different conflict moments throughout history and
yeah.
how they managed to infuse peace through health.
Hmm.
And in particular, here, just for example, the Iraq War, the Gulf War in Iraq. In Iraq, after the Gulf War, the international study team provided information about the impact of the war that had been systemically denied by belligerents on both sides.
Yeah,
So this plays, I had other questions for you leading into the left right, the
hmm,
Cola Wars paradigm,
yeah,
just the
yeah,
these belligerents on both sides
yeah.
barking
Yes,
and both denying the actual truth,
it's true.
touching on it, cherry picking parts of it, and
Well,
then
sure,
barking
because
belligerently.
they each had an agenda, right?
Yeah,
In
the wolf.
Iraq after the Gulf War, the government had been smashed and defeated, and a lot of people killed, but they felt it wasn't in their interest to talk about that. They wanted to look strong and resilient. So they tended to underplay what had happened. And the United States had different motives. They didn't want the world to know that they were creating slaughterhouses everywhere. So they also underplayed it. So people on the ground were victims of these different narratives.
Yes.
So now, of course, this is going on again in a different way now that people's deaths are being covered up. I mean, there's good evidence to suggest, and it's not evidence I can put in the bank, but it's strong that at least 150,000 people in the United States have been killed by this vaccine. But we're being told all the time, no, 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 everything's good, everything's safe. I got this little flyer from from the Canadian government the other day. Vaccines are safe. This is what you should know. That's the very first thing. And then they're effective and blah, blah, blah. But the very first thing, vaccines are safe. Well, guess what, folks? They aren't safe. There are over 1 million reports now in the CDC's own reporting system of serious side effects. The most serious, I suppose, being death. But there are all kinds of other horrible things happening. Athletes collapsing on the field with heart attacks and everything. So once again, we have a narrative and we have to believe it. And if we don't believe it, then we get punished.
Yeah, we get punished by one side or the other.
Yeah.
Regardless, we're on either side being distorted, right?
Yeah, that's something to look out for.
Mhm.
Keep your skepticism. It's not a question of left is correct and right is wrong, or
Mhm.
vice versa. Did you want to talk about the ideological divisions?
Certainly, you are left, right? In the old school sense, I think.
In the
And
old school sense, I've been on the left ever since I first learned what it was,
yeah,
which was a hell of a long time ago.
yeah.
But you have to be careful of these terms, especially if you're
Mhm.
talking to Americans.
Mhm.
I think they were even more programmed by the Cold War than we were in Canada. And so the left, for many people, means Stalinism, basically.
Mhm.
A huge, powerful, oppressive state that makes everyone think the same thing, or else you end up, in a gulag somewhere.
Mhm.
That's not the kind of left that ever I had any interest in whatsoever.
Yeah.
For me, the left, coming out of a kind of working class background and seeing my grandparents and my uncles exploited as coal miners, for me, the left meant everybody is equal in dignity and rights. Nobody, regardless of how poor they are or what their color is or anything, should be exploited. We need to create a humane society together that puts all this together. And, the corporate world is, business is fine as far as I'm concerned, as long as it is not exploiting people and lying to us and all the rest of it. And therefore, I certainly don't believe in letting it do whatever it wants. Now, to me, that's the old-fashioned left. In Canada, at least, there was never a big Stalinist left in Canada. That was very minor. Um, so that's what I meant. But now people means all kinds of different things by left and right.
Mhm. So I'll just give you my definition of left, and it's not even
Yeah,
really a definition; it's more experiential. I coming from a family of progressive activist type people who would attend rallies fighting for against deforestation,
yeah,
for instance.
yeah,
That to me was a left
sure. And
thing.
that was the left to me too. And
Yeah,
to be against war, to be against
yeah,
imperialism,
yeah.
all those things to me were the traditional left. And for the
Mhm,
most part, that was true. By that, I mean people who had those views tended to vote against war
mhm,
and tended to be anti war.
mhm.
I think it's all a mess right now. I think it's even in Canada, never mind the US, it's a complete mess. Left and right means very little.
Right. And so what do you feel about how it's transformed or the meaningless of it now? Is there do you think we need a new term or something. I don't know.
Yeah, we need a new term. We probably need a couple of new political parties. I'm
Yes.
not a I mean, I'm not really a political party guy myself, but
Me
I have
neither.
belonged. I have belonged. I belonged to the NDP for many years,
Hmm.
and currently I'm a member of the Green Party.
Me too.
That was a way of fleeing from the NDP, which seemed to me becoming more and more of a co-opted party. But
Hmm.
at the moment, I'm also disappointed in the Greens. So
Hmm.
I don't really have a home in the party system anymore. Like,
Yeah.
look at the things that I've put my life into, the frauds like 9/11. Name one political party in Canada that has ever acknowledged that, ever showed the slightest interest in looking into that. There isn't one.
No.
In fact, they all punished people if they said anything critical of the official story. Now we've got the same with COVID. Is any political party in Canada questioning what's going on now? The
PPC.
lockdown.
And the problem with the PPC is they deny anthropomorphic climate change. So it's we literally
Yeah,
don't have a party in this
that's
country
what I
anymore.
mean. That's what I mean. Yeah, you get
Yeah.
one little party that is willing to look at this, and you looked at it, you look at its other policies, and you go, no, I'm sorry, I can't
No.
support that. No,
No.
I mean,
And
as
then
I say,
yeah. Sorry.
sorry.
You
Well, no, I'm a member of the Green Party now,
yeah.
and I keep getting letters and stuff and solicitations for funds, all the things that parties do. But there's not even an inkling of critical thinking about what's going on right now. And the
Right.
fact that Canadian democracy is being destroyed, that basically Parliament doesn't exist at the moment, that everything's being done by executive order, the Prime Minister, his cabinet, a few select people, that this whole imposition of an astonishing um, fragmentation of the Charter on Rights and Freedoms, which is what they've done. This has been done without proper study, reporting, parliamentary discussion, anything. And this is happening all over the world. Parliamentary democracy, which may not be perfect, but it's a hell of a lot better than most of the alternatives, is in danger. Okay. And we have countries that we used to think of as, leading democracies, the UK, Australia, going in a very, very authoritarian direction.
Mhm.
So, and I can't get my friends to recognize that. They just kind of go, well, there's a public health emergency, so everything else goes by the book, just no, no, sorry, that's not how it happens.
Mhm.
You don't write a charter of rights and freedoms so that the prime minister and his cabinet can just lift it whenever they proclaim and decide there's an emergency without even discussing it properly with parliament and doing a proper study of it. Nothing. Terrible.
My next interviewer, a man I've reached out to, is Brian Peckford, who was
Oh, wonderful.
yes, one of the last living person who was involved in the drafting of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Canada. So I'm looking forward to that. But as
So
it
there's
just
a guy who's supposedly on the right in Canada,
mhm,
but yet he's the only guy. He's not in politics anymore, but he's still alive and he's still speaking out,
mhm,
who said anything reasonable about what we're going through now,
yeah,
the shredding of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. He's really brilliant on that. So I'm so glad you're interviewing him.
yeah, well, I think that it's important to get the word out. I mean, talk, talk, talk,
Yeah.
talk,
Yeah.
as it in real time is being, ripped, and the uh, courts are alive. Like these are issues that are before the courts where I'm from in Canada,
Yes.
in Vancouver. But as you say, the policy, executive policy that like it just goes in to play in real time, but it's
Yeah.
it's it's the it's the citizens putting it into effect too, right? So it's like it's a really interesting moment, and
It is. It is. If you can step back and look at it,
yeah, the optics
maybe,
of it.
yeah, maybe as a stage play or something,
Yeah.
is very, it's definitely an interesting moment. And we don't know how we're going to come out of this yet.
No.
I mean, the whole thing could fade in the next couple of months,
Mm-hmm.
or we could be in for any number of rounds. When you look at how
Mm-hmm.
much of this vaccine they're stockpiling
Yeah.
in the different countries, they want this to keep going.
Yeah, they ordered millions in advance, you know, I think for
Yeah.
2023, 60 million. So it's like once you sign, this is interesting. I mean, this is somewhat related. Like, I think it was Harper who signed the contract with Saudi Arabia selling arms
Hmm.
and tanks. And Trudeau ran on a campaign of, you know, like peace and love appearing under that guise.
He did. He did. He was Mr. Flower Child.
Yeah, super. Right. And how that's spun around. But he spoke on that because he's the guy who finished that deal, right? Harper
You're
signed.
freezing on me, Nathan.
Oh, hello, check check.
Yeah, try it again. Try it again.
Yes. So Harper signed Canada's good name into that contract, selling arms to Saudi Arabia, and Trudeau honored that, right? That the prime minister signed the contract and did the deal. He was against it in theory, you know,
Right.
the human rights violations that go on, and supplying those individuals with arms, it's a questionable thing to do. But Canada signed its good name, right? So, and now we've signed contracts with Pfizer for 60, 100 million vaccines over the next 4 years. It's like that's Canada signing its good name, right? But it's
No, Mr.
so
Mr.
dangerous.
Trudeau, in my mind, was never up for this job.
Mm,
And whether he is an authoritarian and his true colors are now showing, or whether he's just way, way over his head, I'm not sure. I
mm,
don't think he's one of the I don't think he's one of the key world players in this. I think he's more of a puppet.
mm-hmm,
But he's leading us down a very, very dangerous path right now.
mm-hmm. Puppet, 100%. And I think that anyone who reaches that station, unfortunately, is a puppet at this stage. And it seems the last person maybe who wasn't was JFK, and he was shot, right? So, I mean,
They
obviously
killed
that's the
him.
wrong country. I'm talking about Canada.
No, it's okay. It's a good example to bring up. I don't know
Hmm.
if you've read Jim Douglas's book, JFK and the Unspeakable. I
No.
think the subtitle is Why He Died and Why It Matters, or How He Died and Why It Matters. A really brilliant book. And since a lot of people have blackened JFK's name over the last few years, it's worth reading that book to see how he really was turning away from being a cold warrior to realizing that he needed to have peaceful coexistence with the Cold War enemies, Soviet Union and Cuba, for example. And he also wanted to end, he seems to have genuinely wanted to end the US role as an imperialist power.
Hmm.
And of course, he wasn't to be allowed to do that. The John Foster Dulles crew just shot him in the head. And they did the same to his brother when he was going in the same direction. Now
Hmm.
we have, interestingly, one of the chief spokespeople against COVID-19 lockdowns and vaccines is RFK Jr. in the US. And, I always admired him because I'd read his articles and I thought, this is a smart guy. And
Hmm.
he's an environmental lawyer doing all this great stuff for the environment. And then I realized that, his reputation was being trashed because he had decided to go into have a look at vaccines. He decided that a lot of the damage being done to children were being done by these huge companies that were vaccinating children and they weren't being held responsible for the damage.
Hmm.
Now we have COVID appears on the scene and he emerges as a genuine leader and he publishes this wonderful book, The Real Anthony Fauci. And I've listened to a number of his talks, which I would say are as good as any of the talks that his uncle and his father gave.
Hmm.
He's somebody I didn't think I would really admire that much. I was never that much of a fan of the Kennedy family. But frankly, he's the one who's showing true grit at this moment in history.
Hmm. And he's been in the fight for so long already.
He has.
This is his everyday. So this is
That's
no
right.
different than what he
And
was 10 years ago.
when he says, I'm going to die with my boots on and I'll see you on the barricades, you believe him.
Hmm.
He knows his uncle and his father were both taken down by the deep state. It took him years to come to that, but he eventually came to it. And he knows they could take him down.
Yeah.
And he's prepared for it. And to me, that makes him a genuine leader who's worthy of respect.
And he's speaking in DC tomorrow. So I'm sure
Yes,
online we can tune into that and tune into that.
that would be a great idea. Yeah.
Yeah. What an incredible figure he is. And I just listened to the interview with him and Mike Tyson
Hmm.
on a hotboxing
Hmm.
uh, channel, and it's really great interview. And he speaks to his
Sorry, I'm
family.
losing you, Nathan. I'm
Hello,
losing you.
hello, 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 hello. Check, check. Can you
Yeah,
hear me?
I can hear you now.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
just watching a RFK Jr. interview with Mike Tyson, and he speaks about his family history and everything, and the roots, the political roots. And I'm a musician, and it's cool if you go back the generations before his family's entry into politics was part and parcel with their great grandfather being a pianist and
Oh, okay.
his partner. I could be wrong, maybe it wasn't the great great grandfather, but these are Irish immigrants who came in.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, they had this boisterous Irish mentality,
Yeah.
and they were singing and playing music in the square, and they would summons the crowd by playing music, and
Mm.
his wife partner would sing. And so I thought that was really interesting,
That's
just
beautiful. I didn't know that.
that community aspect. And the
Mm.
Socrates says, a tribe is a group of people the human voice can reach. So if
Mm.
the beginnings of a revolution or the beginnings of a political movement start with music or start with a collective ambiance like that, that's just as a person who loves music and performance
No,
art.
that's very well said, Nathan. And that reminds me to say before the end of this interview that people like yourself who act and who do music are very important to the movement that we need right now.
Mm,
Very, very important. We need music, we need songs, we need performers, we need actors. So I encourage you to find a way to make that work.
thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's been really amazing speaking to you.
Great talking to you, Nathan.
I can't wait to talk to you again. I feel grounded. I feel reassured. Everyone needs to get a copy of the 9/11 Toronto report. Graeme Macqueen, thank you for speaking to me. This is Nathan Barrett, and I cannot recommend it enough to revisit. I was going to say the classics,
The
but
classic. You can
you know,
call it a classic. I'm okay with that.
yeah. I mean, it's an important read.
You can call me an ancient voice from the
An
past.
ancient voice from the past, Graeme Macqueen,
That's right. That's me.
speaking from the ether. And as a Buddhist, I am also a Buddhist.
Mm,
I'm a yogi. I'm a
mm,
meditator.
mhm.
And I really feel like we should be meditating like 3 hours a day right now. Everyone should.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's so important to sustain, as you're saying, an argument, sustaining linear thought, sustaining the ability to read a book, that's sustaining of longevity of focus. Meditation is such an incredible tool, impeccable tool for
It
that.
is. It
And
is. Calming down the organism and allowing the mind to settle and finding a little bit of your center and not getting caught up in all the tremendous anger and revenge and frustration. So well said.
thank you, Graeme.
Okay, Nathan. I take it this is goodbye.
Sayonara.
Okay. Au revoir.
Au revoir. Hope
Yeah,
to see you sometime in Canada. You're in Ontario.
I am.
I'm in
Yeah,
Vancouver,
Hamilton.
Hamilton.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. I can't wait to. Also, yes, I wanted to recommend this book, 9/11 Toronto Report. Everyone must read this. Um, Anything by Graeme Macqueen, I highly recommend.
I wrote a book on the anthrax attacks.
Oh my God, I'd love to talk to you about that too. Yeah.
we'll do that some other time.
Okay, thank you so much. And yes, I'm gonna dig in your work, continue to, and it's beautiful work. Thank you so much for everything you've done. I much appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on, Nathan.
My pleasure. Namaste. Thank
Namaste.
you.
Bye-bye.